Jerusalem, the distant one, the holder of secrets and mysteries. Its walls and edifices cling to hopes, like the vines that cling to its white and golden rock. According to Islamic tradition, the Prophet Mohammed ascended to paradise through a stairway of light from this very rock, hidden within the splendor of the Golden Dome at the heart of a city of stone.
This rock, it's you look at it, you don't see a rock in the world like that. It's from heaven. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, if you want to look at the rock from heaven, just go look at the rock in Jerusalem.
This film will explore the power and mystery surrounding this rock, believed by millions of Muslims to be the destination of Muhammad's fantastic night journey to Jerusalem. The cobblestone streets of the old city of Jerusalem are bustling. These are the first days of the month of Ramadan. Muslim residents of the city are preparing for the feast to break their daily fast. Here at the Damascus Gate, a graceful reminder of Ottoman architecture. Muslims gather here from other parts of Jerusalem and further afield. The confectioners are frantically baking the treats which all have come to buy. The shops are full of food, but no one will eat until darkness falls, for this is a month of fasting. During the fast, Muslims commemorate the Night of Power, when Muhammad received his first revelation from the angel Gabriel. The Quran, Islam's sacred scripture, contains the last words of God as received by Muhammad, the messenger. The illiterate caravan leader from Mecca, who became a prophet at the age of 40, managed in his lifetime to unify the nomadic tribes of the Arabian desert, to follow the way of Allah. Wherever they may be in any part of the world, millions of Muslims stop all activity 5 times a day and submit themselves to Allah. They face the direction of Mecca, the birthplace of the Prophet Muhammad. But the original Qibla, or direction in which to pray, was towards Jerusalem, a city second in holiness only to Mecca and Medina, and known to Muslims as Al-Kuds, the Holy One.
Muhammad prayed facing towards Jerusalem. You see, that was the first direction of prayer from Medina, and it was only when he realized that he would not convert Jews, they were too loyal to their own traditions, that in the middle of prayer one day he changed the direction and faced towards Mecca. So you have the Mosque of the Two Qiblas, but that underlines the importance of Jerusalem as a sacred place for Muhammad himself.
Rejected by his own people, the pagan tribes of Mecca, Muhammad appealed to the Jews and adopted their custom of praying towards Jerusalem. Immigrating to Medina, he hoped to be accepted by the people of the book, as he saw himself to be the last of the biblical prophets. But most of the Jews ridiculed him and his knowledge of the Bible. Some historians believe that Muhammad's difficulties with the Jews of Medina resulted in his changing the direction of prayer towards Mecca.
there certainly was an estrangement with the Jews. The estrangements led to the expulsion of the Jewish tribes in Medina, and in fact the last tribe was annihilated. The men were annihilated and the women and children were sold into slavery.
But changing the direction of prayer did not diminish the importance of Jerusalem. According to tradition, 8 years after his first revelation, Muhammad was miraculously transported to Jerusalem to the Masjid al-Aqsa.
And the Masjid al-Aqsa, even that is controverted. His biographer said, Muhammad's biographer said that it was Jerusalem, but other traditionalists said, no, it's a spiritual place somewhere in the heavens.
Muhammad's biographer, Hassan al-Basri, provides us with the details of the night journey.
The angel Gabriel appeared to Muhammad in his sleep and stirred him with his foot 3 times. The Prophet awoke with a start and was led by Gabriel to the door, where he saw a white animal, half mule, half donkey, with wings on its sides.
And he took him through the animal called Burak, which is big, smaller than the horse and bigger than the donkey. And he came all the way from Mecca to Jerusalem. And the trip took him less than seconds, just blink of the eye. And he came here, and Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was the Imam of 120,000 prophets in Jerusalem. That's why this Jerusalem is for Muslims, not for anybody else.
Behind the Western Wall, the holiest of Jewish sites, lies the 35-acre platform known as the Temple Mount to Jews and Christians, and as Haram ash-Sharif to the Muslims. Today, where once may have stood Solomon's Temple, stands a building which has been most closely identified with Jerusalem, the splendid Dome of the Rock.
A central miracle of Muhammad as proof of his prophecy is this journey to Jerusalem in one night. So because of that, maybe this building was built in Jerusalem in the 7th century.
There is only one obscure reference in the Quran to Muhammad's night journey.
Glorified be he who carried his servant by night from the inviolable place of worship to the Al-Aqsa Mosque.
This verse makes no mention of the angel Gabriel, the mythical creature Barak, or even Jerusalem.
Well, actually, Jerusalem is not mentioned in the Quran at all, the name Jerusalem per se. What we have is a mention of a place called the Aqsa Mosque. Now, Aqsa in Arabic means the furthest, or farther, or the furthest mosque. And approximately the first verse of the 17th chapter of the Quran runs something to the effect of, praise be God who brought his prophet from the most holy mosque, meaning Mecca, to the furthest mosque, meaning what is understood to be Jerusalem. Now, this identification is not immediate or was not automatic.
According to tradition, Muhammad was carried on the back of the winged steed Al-Burak, the lightning, from Mecca through Sinai and Bethlehem on his way to Jerusalem. As commanded by the angel Gabriel, Muhammad alighted from Al-Burak and tied him at what is now known as the Western Wall. Till this day, the last remnant of the Jewish temple is called Al-Burak by Muslims. Upon his arrival, Muhammad stopped to pray here at the Dome of Ascension. Nearby, where the angel Gabriel was said to have waited for him, the Dome of Fatma was built. To all Muslims, this journey was real in the material sense. To deny the night journey would be to deny the power of God.
God, who can do everything, brought Muhammad from Mecca to Jerusalem within seconds. And this is 14 centuries ago. There were no airplanes then. There was no transportation. God can do everything. Nothing can stop him.
Inside this golden dome is one of the most sacred spots in the world, for it protects the Sakra, a rock whose surface is riddled with mysteries, legends, and myths. Christians believe that on this rock, Jesus was circumcised, and according to Jewish tradition, This is the site on Mount Moriah where Abraham bound his son Isaac to be sacrificed. But according to the Quran, this could not have happened because it was Abraham's other son Ishmael, the father of the Arab nation, that was to be sacrificed.
The Israelis believe that Abraham sacrificed Isaac on the rock to make some relationship or connection to them with the rock. Actually, the Muslims never denied the sacrifice happened, but not here in Mecca, and not with Isaac, with Ismail.
The dispute over this rock is not only a religious one. Some modern historians speculate that the rock may have served as the Jewish temple's altar, since there are perforations and holes that suggest the drainage of blood. Others theorize that the rock was the Holy of Holies, which the high priest entered once a year on the most sacred of Jewish holidays.
I think the rock was the base of the Holy of Holies. In the description, the Jewish descriptions, a portion of rock projects 3 fingers above the floor of the Holy of Holies. And that is the only possible candidate for the site. And the reason why Abdul Malik, who built the Dome of the Rock, sited it on the rock was, I think, to claim the rock, which was a center of Jewish sanctity, for Islam.
Muslim tradition teaches that when Muhammad was escorted by Gabriel, he went up to the Sakra, the sacred rock, and greeted it. "Peace be unto you, rock of God." The Sakra answered, "Peace be unto you, messenger of Allah." In one corner of the rock is a tall cabinet. According to tradition, inside it are the flag and the sword of Muhammad and 3 hairs from his beard. Muhammad stepped on this spot on the rock, leaving a fragrant essence of holiness. Where he touched the rock, this cabinet was built. When Muslims come to visit this revered spot, they daub themselves with the perfume. Muhammad also prayed in the cave underneath the rock, and from here he ascended to heaven. For Muslims, standing by the stone is the highlight of a Hajj, the pilgrimage to Jerusalem. They believe all their prayers will be granted if they pray here.
Prophet Muhammad stayed here for a while with his soul connected to God. And through this place, he had the miracle by God's will to be ascended to heaven, the 7th heaven, and back again.
Through this hole in the rock, Muhammad ascended a ladder of light which led to heaven. It is said that the rock itself rose with Muhammad until God ordered it to return to earth. This is the second miracle to happen that night. The first was the Isra, the night journey to Jerusalem, and the second was the Ma'raj, the ascent to heaven. The night of the Isra and the Ma'raj is marked by Muslims as a holiday.
Hello.
On the Temple Mount, Sufis, the Muslim mystics, and religious Muslims gathered to commemorate the night journey and the ascension to heaven. Together they sing in praise of the Prophet. The tune they sing to is the same one sung all over the world in different languages to mark this night. After passing through the 7 gates of heaven and witnessing many delightful and unimaginable sights, Muhammad was summoned to face Allah, who gave him precepts on the prayers his followers must perform.
God taught Sayyidina Muhammad the prayers. He gave him 50 times to pray each day. When he went to Prophet Moses, because he was a prophet before him, he told him 50 times it's too much for your people. I would advise you to ask God for mercy for less than that. So God gave him 5 times prayer, which is the morning, noon, afternoon, evening, and late evening prayers. And each one is by 10 by 10. So 5 times by 10 is 50 times. And he showed us how we're going to lead the whole world, how we're going to, inshallah, be on top of the world.
After the night journey, prayer 5 times a day became one of the 5 pillars of Islam. All Muslims, both men and women, from all nations, must adhere to these tenets. They have unified Muslims throughout the ages. At night, they rouse themselves from sleep for the first prayer of the day. The night prayer before dawn was instituted to purify the Muslims of their previous sun-worshipping ways. After meeting with Allah, Muhammad then descended back to earth at the sacred rock of Jerusalem and returned to Mecca on Al-Barak before daybreak. When Muhammad told the story of his journey to the people of Mecca, they thought that it was absurd, for a journey from Mecca by caravan would take a month and another month to return. Then they asked Muhammad to describe Jerusalem.
He described Jerusalem exactly as he saw it. A lot of them had been to Jerusalem before, and he described it exactly like they knew it, and they believed in the night journey.
If indeed Muhammad did travel to Jerusalem on his night journey, he visited a Christian city that was the jewel in the crown of the Byzantine Empire. From its seat in Constantinople, the Byzantine Empire had controlled Jerusalem since the beginning of the 4th century. During this time, they Christianized the city. Their decision to legalize and foster Christianity increased the significance of the Holy Land and the places associated with Jesus' birth, death, and resurrection. The Byzantines erected the Basilica of the Holy Sepulchre on the site of the crucifixion. Thousands of Christian pilgrims flocked to the Holy City. Monasteries and basilicas sprang up all over. The Temple Mount, however, was seen as an accursed place, and it was turned into a garbage dump.
They ignored the Temple Mount completely. They used it for growing cucumbers, we're told, and they stole stones, the old stones of the Jewish temple, in order to build our houses. Because for them, the destruction of the temple was a very important theological symbol that God's favor had passed from the Jewish people to the Christian church.
Under Byzantine control, the Jews were permitted to enter the city once a year for a price, to pray and lament the destruction of their temple. This mosaic of a Byzantine map of Jerusalem from the 6th century shows a Christian city surrounded by walls and towers. Fired by a desire to spread God's message, the Muslims defeated the Byzantine Empire. In a short time, the realm of Muslim rule extended from Afghanistan in the east to Spain in the west, under the command of the Caliph Omar.
And the great figure was Omar, who was the caliph who led the squadrons, great camel squadrons, out of the Arabic Peninsula, which is Saudi Arabia. And their drive was so great that when they beat the Muslims, when they beat the Byzantines at the Battle of the Yarmouk in August 636, they didn't wait to accept the surrender. They just kept driving ahead, took Syria, drove across the desert, took Persia. And it was only 2 years later that they came back to accept the surrender.
This was the first bloodless conquest in Jerusalem's history. The Orthodox Patriarch Sophronius, the spiritual leader of the Christians at that time, capitulated in person to the Caliph Omar. Sophronius guided Omar through Jerusalem to the Holy Sepulchre Church. At the time of prayer, Sophronius invited Omar to pray there. Omar refused, knowing that Muslims would use the site as an Islamic holy place. Instead, Omar went outside and prayed in the courtyard of the Holy Sepulchre, where a mosque named after Omar was erected. To prevent conflicts over the site, Omar put the Nusayba family in charge of the keys to the Holy Sepulchre Church. This tradition has been kept by the Nusaybas till this day.
We are in charge of opening and closing the church since 636 AD, when the Muslims they came to the city of Jerusalem by the Caliph Omar. When he entered the city of Jerusalem, our family, one of the people, they entered the city in that time. The keys, it was given indeed and since the time of the Caliph Omar.
Another tradition tells us that the Caliph Omar entered Jerusalem on foot out of respect for the holy city. When he requested that the Patriarch Sophronius lead him to the site of the Temple Mount, Sophronius tried to fool him, showing him to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The Patriarch didn't know that the Caliph had already found out the true site of the Temple Mount from a local Jew who had converted to Islam. Sophronius then pointed out that the only way to enter the Temple Mount was by crawling in. The Caliph answered, "Then on our knees be it," and prompted Sophronius to crawl with him. The holy rock was covered with refuse, which the Caliph Omar wiped with his sleeve.
When Omar came to Jerusalem in probably 637, 638, then he was scandalized at the neglect of the Temple Mount and blamed the Christians for it, because in his view, Christians should have respected Judaism as its predecessor, just as Islam respected the two peoples of the book, Christians and Jews. And so then one of Omar's first acts was to guarantee that no Jew or no Christian would be dispossessed of their property.
Omar is described as a tolerant figure. His triumphal entrance to Jerusalem is glorified by many legends and folklore. But these traditions are the only references that historians have of the account of Omar in Jerusalem.
Well, there's some question here whether did Omar actually come to Jerusalem. Let's assume that we'll follow the sort of the general trend in tradition to say he did come here. Jerusalem is important, and the Temple Mount is important. And the first thing one of the things that Omar does is that he builds the Aqza Mosque, more or less on where the Aqza Mosque is today.
Visiting his troops in Syria, Omar issued a proclamation for the people of Jerusalem.
This is the covenant which Omar, the commander of the faithful, granted to the people of Jerusalem. He granted them safety for their lives, for their possessions, their churches and their crosses. They should not be constrained in the matter of their religion, nor shall any of them be molested.
There were no forced conversion of Christians. You see, Christians could retain their churches, retain their property. They were not obliged to become Muslims. Similarly, as they swept through Persia, there were conversions of infidels, but an infidel is anyone who is not a Jew or not a Muslim, and not a Christian.
Under the new Muslim rule, the Jews were permitted to return to Jerusalem. Some Jewish families were in charge of maintaining the Temple Mount and were even exempt from paying the tax most non-Muslims had to pay. 7 years after his conquest of Jerusalem, the Caliph Omar was assassinated, and political unrest continued with the assassination of Hussein, the only grandson of Mohammed. The assassination of Hussein by the Umayyads, the Muslim rulers of Damascus, caused a division within Islam that continues to this day. During this period, the Islamization of Jerusalem was not complete, since most of the inhabitants remained Christian. One theory suggests that the Umayyads, the new rulers of the city, built the Golden Dome of the Rock in 691, in order to attract the Christian population to the new religion.
The Holy Sepulchral Church is in Jerusalem. Most of the important events of Jesus took place in Jerusalem. So the Muslims wanted to show that they are also magnificent. Their religion is also magnificent. So they built this dominating building inside the old city, just opposite to the Christian Holy Sepulchral Church, in order to show how powerful, how cultural is Islam.
Another theory suggests that the Dome of the Rock was built for political reasons. After the Umayyad dynasty had lost control over Mecca to their religious rivals, they tried to turn Jerusalem into their religious center.
There was, in the 7th century, a revolution against the Umayyad dynasty in Mecca, because a lot of Muslims visiting yearly Mecca. So Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, the Umayyad Caliph who built this building, thought maybe instead of Mecca, he wanted to attract them to Jerusalem, to be under his control. So he built this farm with a very large platform where the pilgrimage can go around the Dome of the Rock as the tradition in Mecca.
The pilgrimage to Mecca, the Hajj, is one of the pillars of Islam. And many scholars today agree that even a caliph couldn't change this institution.
That theory that it was built as an alternative to Mecca, I think, is false. It was a story that was put out by a succeeding dynasty. It was the Abbasids put that story out. And we know that during this period, pilgrims were in fact still going to Mecca. And that would have been, to create an alternative to Mecca, would have been the ultimate apostasy as far as Islam was concerned, because the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca, is one of the foundations of the faith.
Since the Umayyad period, those who couldn't make the pilgrimage to Mecca would visit Jerusalem instead. Travel to Jerusalem was considered to be a small Hajj. Even today, anyone who comes back from the Hajj to Mecca is traditionally greeted with the words, "May you visit Al-Kuds, Jerusalem, also." The Dome of the Rock. It's the oldest Muslim structure, still standing virtually unchanged for 1,300 years. The Umayyads built their civilization by synthesizing elements of the various cultures they conquered. This is clear within every detail of its structure. The Byzantine, Persian, Coptic, and local Syrian cultures can all be traced inside this one building.
You cannot manage to fix one culture as dominating culture all over this dome, but pieces of different cultures were put together. But the whole building, at the end, you can say it's an Arab Islamic building, but its small pieces are collected from different cultures. So Islam cooked these elements in one pot, and this pot is the Dome of the Rock.
The design of the Dome of the Rock, the site of Muhammad's ascension to heaven, is filled with mystical significance. Muslim architecture endeavored to imitate paradise in this world. It is assumed that paradise has 8 doors, one more than hell, because God's mercy is greater than his wrath. Thus, the number 8, the number of paradise, is constantly repeated in its design. 8 stairways are leading to the platform on which the dome stands. 8 arcades of arches complete the symmetry of the building. The extraordinary harmony which permeates the Dome of the Rock is due to the mathematical precision in which all of its dimensions relate to the center circle around the rock.
It certainly is the most beautiful Islamic building that I know, and chronologically it is the oldest monumental Islamic building. And it must have been built by Christians from Syria, you see, because the design is a very common one. There's nothing Islamic about that particular octagonal shape. It's much more reminiscent of memorial churches. Everything is an expansion of the original circle to get the octagons, and then to get the vertical, you just turn it on its side, you see? And that's why it gives such a pleasing impression of everything fits, everything is proportioned.
On the drum beneath the dome, Richly decorated windows allow light to enter the dome. The design of the inner octagon is set at an angle, highlighting replicas of the crowns and jewels of the kingdoms defeated by Islam. The columns inside it originally supported the arches and domes of Byzantine churches. The different architectural styles achieve a surprisingly aesthetic harmony. The interior as a whole stands as a monument to the Muslim struggle to defeat the Byzantine Empire. The calligraphy inside is a direct appeal to the Christians that Islam is the true religion that succeeds its imperfect predecessors.
It's a political statement, yeah. I mean, I wish that all political statements were made with the same grace and beauty, but the inscription that you can read also is a very strong invitation, if you wish, to Christians not to speak of the divinity of Christ, not to speak of the Trinity, not to speak of Mary as the Mother of God. So that it's a very definite message, both to Jews by its sighting over the rock, and also a message to Christians by the form of the decoration.
Jesus is clear, a main feature inside the Dome of the Rock, according to the Quranic inscriptions, where Jesus is, or God never gave birth. God is just one. He has no sons, he has no father, etc. So this dome is the dome of Islam. Under the dome of the Islam, most of the existing, in the 7th century, existing political system are under control.
In the southern corner of the Temple Mount, the Umayyads engaged in the construction of the Al-Aqsa Mosque in 746. Old documents tell about a fine architect from Egypt who was sent to Jerusalem to build a mosque in the name of God. The columns are made from gray marble, and the tops of the columns are all Byzantine. Its structure is comprised of various different styles, renovated many times through the centuries. The remains of the early Al-Aqsa Mosque can still be found in the courtyard of the Al-Aqsa Mosque today. The inner structure of the Al-Aqsa Mosque today closely resembles that of the original. This underground area takes the overflow of the mosque on feast days and leads to the blocked gates in the walls of Jerusalem. Archaeological excavations are unearthing evidence of the Muslims' first presence in Jerusalem during the reign of the Umayyads. Recent archaeological digs are revealing 3 layers of different historical periods that were built upon a Herodian street from the time of the Second Jewish Temple.
The aim of our project is to remove the later phases that have accumulated here on top of the Herodian street and reveal the whole street. That means we have to peel off this massive structure, which is part of a Muslim palace constructed here around the year 700. After that, remove sections of Byzantine buildings dating from the 4th to 7th century, and also remove all these massive boulders toppled down from Herod's Temple Mount in the destruction done by the Romans in the year 70.
The excavations have uncovered 3 Umayyad palaces and a street from the Umayyad period. Once the Herodian period is exposed, the palaces will be removed and reconstructed elsewhere. Meanwhile, the archaeologists are unearthing evidence of the first Islamic presence in Jerusalem.
Our assumption is that the building is from the early Islamic period, and the coin should date it accurately, more or less to the beginning of the 8th century. This is the most important find of the week, I believe.
The Hisham Palace near Jericho is one of the few places which attests to the Umayyads' magnificence. The mosaics have remained intact to this day. It is a relic from the time of the first Muslim presence in the Holy Land. In Jerusalem, past and present meet during the fast of the month of Ramadan. It is one of the highest grossing periods for Muslim businesses. Delicacies and sweet confections are bought and eaten at nightfall when the fast ends. One of the traditional favorites is mushabak, a simple red and white sweet made of thick corn flour. It is prepared only in Jerusalem to celebrate the event of Muhammad's night journey. On the streets of the Muslim quarter today, one gets the sense of what Muslim life must have been like before being ravaged in the 11th century by the Franks. The European invaders, the Crusaders, came on a mission to redeem the Holy Land from the Muslims. Their main target was Jerusalem.
The Crusaders believed that Jerusalem is going to fall into their hands exactly like Jericho fell into the hands of Joshua. So that when they came to Jerusalem, they came without any preparation, without siege machines, without nothing. They just came, and after 3 or 4 days that they besieged the city, they tried to scale it and to jump on the walls, and of course failed. So they started thinking in terms of proper siege. For siege, you need wood, because you have to build siege towers.
In their search for wood, the Crusaders turned to Jaffa port, where they dismantled ships docked there from Genoa and brought the beams back with them to Jerusalem in order to build siege machines. On Friday, July 15, 1099, the Franks, led by Godfrey de Bouillon, succeeded in penetrating Jerusalem through the northern side of the wall. Blood covered the streets of the city. In a heightened state of religious mania, the Crusaders slaughtered all those they encountered. In the Jewish quarter, Jews burned in the synagogues where they sought refuge. The Muslim inhabitants ran to seek shelter within the mosque on the Temple Mount, but their efforts to save themselves were in vain.
The belief of the community here around that in a holy place they are secured. So they are protected. The Crusaders, as believers in God, will not do anything for them if they enter in a holy place. But that doesn't help, even for those who escaped to the Holy Sepulchral Church were massacred. I think the Crusaders were God thirsty of blood.
Even Christians, who made up the majority of the population, were not safe. Tens of thousands are said to have died in the massacre. Frankish historians wrote that here the slaughter was so great that in the Temple Mount area the Crusader horses waded upon a sea of blood up to their knees.
When the Crusaders got to the Temple Mount, it blew their mind because they expected to find the temple. You see, they hadn't really heard of the Islamic mosques. And they were surprised to find 2 buildings. They expected only 1. So they called the Dome of the Rock the Temple of the Lord, and the Aqza Mosque the Temple of Solomon. See? And they transformed the Dome of the Rock into a church.
A Crusader map of the 12th century shows the development of the architectural landscape of Jerusalem under the Franks. On the Dome of the Rock, a large golden cross, which could be seen for miles, replaced the crescent of Islam. The Templar Knights took over the Temple Mount. After the Crusaders captured Jerusalem, they converted the Al-Aqsa Mosque into their royal palace. They renamed it the Temple of Solomon, the Dome of the Rock, Templus Domini, the Lord's Temple. Crusaders built chapels and memorial buildings on the Temple Mount. On the eastern wall of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, we can still see a rosette window, typical of Crusader architecture of the 12th century. What is known today as Mohammed's Dome of Ascension is another remnant of Crusader architecture. Scholars believe it was originally built as a fountain for baptism. Its structure resembles the Crusader building on the site of Jesus' ascension on the Mount of Olives. The Templar Knights built an altar over the rock, which they believed to be the site of Jesus' circumcision. They tried to protect it from over-enthusiastic pilgrims chipping away relics of the rock.
It took about almost 40 years for them to really turn it into a proper church. And pilgrims tended to, take bits of the stone, and they realized if this went on too long that the central feature would disappear. So the Crusaders brought a magnificent wrought iron screen from Normandy, which they set in the pillars of the circle.
The conquest of Jerusalem by the Crusaders threw the Muslim world into a frenzy. The desecration of the holy places of Islam and the savage treatment of Muslims inspired one of the first calls to jihad, holy war, in Islamic history.
The Crusaders were completely barbaric, and it was the savage massacre of everyone in the city when the Crusaders arrived that stimulated the fanaticism of Islam. Then they realized from the very beginning that they could not work with these barbarians from Europe. And consequently, then Christians were treated as enemies, precisely because they were Christians.
88 years would pass before Saladin would be able to subjugate the invaders. On Friday, October the 2nd, 1187, the 27th of Rajab in the year 583 of the Muslim calendar, on the very day on which Muslims celebrate Muhammad's night journey, Saladin entered Jerusalem on the second bloodless reconquest in the city's history. One of the greatest Islamic leaders of all time, Saladin was also blessed with tremendous compassion. Unlike his Christian predecessors, he granted his enemies mercy, allowing them to leave with their lives as well as their possessions. After the Crusades, the battle over the spirit of Jerusalem was played in the skyline of the city. The Muslims legislated construction laws curtailing the height of non-Muslim buildings. Saladin engaged in the re-Islamization of the city. Some churches were turned into shrines and mosques. The Church of St. Anne became a madrasa, a Muslim house of study. One can still see the Arabic inscription over the entrance of the church.
The whole conflict took the form of cultural appearance and demographic appearance of the city. The Crusaders changed the whole demography of the city and gave a new appearance to the city, which more European Christian appearance. When Salah ad-Din reconquered the city, he changed the whole demography of the city and gave Islamic appearance of the city. So the city lost its culture twice in a very dramatic form.
Although brief, the Crusader period forever changed the Muslims' views of the Christians. It was the first major clash between East and West. Ever since, mutual distrust has dominated the perception each has of the other. Until the mid-19th century, the Christians were the last non-Muslims to enter the Temple Mount under punishment of death. Infidels caught inside were given a choice: death or conversion to Islam. It was feared that any non-Muslim entering the Temple Mount would have their prayers granted, and it was naturally assumed that any infidel would wish for the demise of Islam. Long corridors from Crusader times are reminiscent of the arches of European churches. This grammar school was built during the Crusader era. The Muslims call the arches at the entrance the intestines of the Christians, symbolizing the convoluted Christian philosophy. Saladin re-established the Islamic quality of Jerusalem. Muslims returned to the holy city and imbued it once more with the soul of Islam. And it is during Ramadan that this feeling is heightened in modern Jerusalem. It is a time when Muslim families gather together to prepare the meals they'll eat after the fast and to eat and pray together. The Halawani family can trace their presence in Jerusalem to the days of Saladin. Abdul Halim and Miriam Halawani passed the traditions of Ramadan along to their children. During the month of fasting, great emphasis is placed on food.
This is a sweet pie called goulash. It's an Arabic food, and it's sweet. We prepared one with nuts, and this one is with cheese.
Included in the Halawani's menu tonight is kube, thick cornmeal patties filled with meat and nuts and deep fried in oil. Mansaf, a dish of rice mixed with lamb and chickpeas with almonds sprinkled on top, is the satisfying main course used to break the daily fast. It is said that Muhammad broke his fast every day by eating 1 or 2 dates. Following the Prophet's way, it's a tradition in Ramadan that everyone break the fast by eating a date. In Jerusalem, the Ramadan meal is a social time when neighbors and friends are invited to eat together and enjoy the festivities. Thousands of Muslims gather each year on the Temple Mount for the last meal of Ramadan. It's a tradition in Jerusalem to invite the poor and needy to partake of this feast, marking the end of the month of fasting. During the entire month of Ramadan, worshippers flock to the Temple Mount from all over the Muslim world. Before entering the Aqza Mosque, all Muslims ritually wash at this fountain. They wash according to the command of Allah.
O you who believe, when you prepare for prayer, wash your faces and your hands and your elbows, rub your heads with water and your feet to the ankles.
They further protect the sanctity of the mosque by leaving their shoes at the door and entering barefoot. When Al-Aqsa is filled to capacity, they pray outside, shoulder to shoulder. When they turn to the right and then to the left at the end of their prayers, they are greeting 2 angels which accompany each man throughout his life. These angels record each man's actions in books. They will present these books on Judgment Day. When the time of judgment comes, all will be responsible for their actions and judged according to what is written in the Book of Deeds. Humans and spirits alike will gather in Jerusalem to be judged and consigned to the pleasures of heaven or the torments of hell.
Then on that day will the event befall, and the earth with the mountains shall be lifted up and crushed with one crash. Mecca and Medina will be carried to Jerusalem. The earth will break open and bring forth every human being that ever lived. All will await in burning heat for the final decree.
The Judgment Day, it's gonna be, everybody gonna be in the Jerusalem area here. It's gonna be gathered from all over the world. Judgment Day is gonna be here. Who is unbelievers, they're gonna go to hell. and the believer is going to go to heaven, inshallah.
The 8 graceful arches facing the sides of the Dome of the Rock are the scales on which God will balance each soul's sins. According to an ancient tradition, the Messiah will enter Jerusalem through the Gate of Mercy, known in the West as the Golden Gate. Nearby, to the south, is Mohammed's pillar. A thread as thin as a hair and as sharp as a razor will extend from the Mount of Olives over the Kidron Valley to the Mercy Gate. On one side will stand Jesus, and on the other, on the Mount of Olives, will stand Mohammed. The just will be able to walk on the thread to paradise, while the sinners will tumble to their death. Although not mentioned even once in the Quran, Jerusalem is linked in the Muslim mind to salvation and the delights and pleasures of the hereafter. Jerusalem, where the stairway to paradise was extended to Muhammad, will be the only holy city which will survive the Day of Judgment. A city chosen as the main battleground for numerous empires and civilizations will at last see peace and stand for all eternity.